Guys, Chris here with Simply Japanese Maples. Today we're going to do a quick lesson on repotting your Japanese maple. So generally speaking, taking your Japanese maple, putting it into another pot or putting it into the ground, it's going to be very similar things to a lot of other types of transplanting you would do with other trees and plants. There's a few little things that we need to be aware of and to watch for, and I'm going to mention those in this video. We have talked about it before in other videos, but this one I don't think I've ever done one specifically on potting your trees or putting them in the ground. And we are going to do a video at some point in the near future of actually putting trees in the ground. Okay, so let's have a look here. Okay, so we've got a couple plants here one that recently went in this pot. Look how amazing that looks. So these are both Irish lace, and they both look great, but you can see one in our plastic pot, and suddenly you put that into that beautiful little container, and bam, just shining. Looks awesome. Okay, so what we're doing is taking Acer palmatum Kembu today, which is this lovely, smaller growing yellow-green, or kind of an olivey green, I guess, Linear lobum, and it's going into this pot. We've got a couple little tools here. We've got root pruners, so basically these are pruners that I use specifically for roots. And we got a little fork here. You could use any old little fork. This is particularly a bonsai tool. And I've got some mix already made up here, which is basically a mixture of a potting soil local to our part of the world here, and which has quite a few like sort of wood fines in it. And I've put perlite in there. I've put also some wood mulch in there and a little bit of fertilizer. So again, we did a video on that before. So here's our Kembu. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the roots, and we can see that the roots, this thing is definitely ready to get into another pot. Roots are basically, some of them are circling quite a bit. So what we're going to do with that is essentially you can either gently use your hands, your fingers, or you can use a tool, and we can gently kind of, loosen those up. Now, any roots that are circling and are rigid can be pruned off. I know that's going to come as a bit of a shocker to you, that you're going to prune roots, but basically here's what happens is if you have a root, for example, like this guy, if this is circling around the root ball and doesn't get pulled off, can't be straightened out when you go to plant it in the planting hole or into the pot, in the pot's going to be a little different because you're not going to necessarily pull the roots out into the hole. You're basically putting it into, a similarly sized pot, so you don't have room to pull the roots out. So in that situation, you're likely going to prune this off. Back to my point. So you get to a situation where these are circling around and perhaps they're too rigid to actually loosen. Basically take your pruners, come in here, pick a spot, closest to the root ball kind of thing. Hopefully there's some little feeder roots coming off it, but that's okay. And prune it off, because what's going to happen is that as this tree grows, and I've seen this before, as this tree grows, you're going to have this root that goes around the root ball, and that root is never going to straighten itself out. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and essentially almost strangling the tree, and eventually the whole thing could just fall right over. Because now these roots, the roots are not like, a lot of roots in some other deciduous type trees. They're not quite as large, aggressive, all these things, say as your willows and oaks and all those deciduous types. But so they're still going to get big, and so you just have this big root that's circled around the tree, gotten bigger, providing no stability whatsoever. So just lop it right off. It's not going to kill the tree, and you're actually helping the tree in the long run. So yeah, so I've kind of come around here. Everything looks pretty good. I don't have to go too crazy. Probably what I'm going to do is, because it is going into container, I am going to cut these back a little shorter. There's no need to have the longer roots. If this was going in the ground, then I wouldn't hesitate to just leave them as they are and sort of gently backfill all soil around it. So basically, we'll take our pruners here. Again, these are specifically, I use these specifically for root pruning, but it's just a heavy duty set of scissors, and they do cut a pretty good diameter size. So let's see here. So I'm just going to come in here, going to get rid of that, and take a couple of these off. Again, because it's going in a pot, we don't need to have these long roots. I don't want to go too crazy here, but yeah. The other thing is, it's not going to stay necessarily in the same pot for decades. It's going to be in the same pot maybe for a couple years. Maybe initially they weren't pruned off the best way. So now you're going to have an opportunity to come back and sort of revisit that and sort of reassess. So you can always do it a little bit later. Now, if it's in the landscape, obviously a little different. That's why it's the most important at that point to kind of get it right. So it's not a perfect science. It's just basically, okay, our roots circling, can I gently pull them apart? If they're not, if they're rigid and I can't pull them apart and they're circling around the root ball, just cut them. Okay, at this point, I'm going to take my container mix. Now this container mix, basically I'll use the same thing as well. If I'm planting this into the ground, I'm going to use the same thing to actually take this mix that I've made and amend it with the native soil, which is great way to sort of get your tree started off, give it a kick start, versus just putting it into that sandy soil or putting it into that clay soil. You're really helping it. Just give it some more aerated material. That's the whole point with this, you know, having very sort of large, not large, but of different sizes of pieces. It just creates more of an airy sort of material for the roots. Obviously, as trees get bigger, you know, they're stronger. They have the ability to push through a lot of harder packed soil. I mean, we all know that we've seen trees lift sidewalks. Typically, we won't see this with our maples, but you do see it with North American maples or oaks or willows or things like that. Okay, so we trimmed our roots off. We've put probably about, it's tough to see this, we've put about half an inch or so, half an inch to an inch of the mix in the bottom of the pot. This pot does have a hole in it. I can't really, there it is, I think you can see it. And now, with our trees here specifically, a lot of my suppliers, the trees that I'm getting from them, they put, because it's a cheap way to put mulch on top, is they're going to put this sawdust, it's not sawdust, it's basically very, very fine wood chips. And so it's a cheap way for them to mulch the trees, but it's not the best thing for the trees in the long run, because you basically want mulch that is bigger than this, bigger pieces than this, because it decomposes slower. This stuff decomposes really fast, and so what's happening is that it's decomposing, and that root ball is essentially, it's getting decomposed into that, but when stuff decomposes, it essentially is sort of, I don't know why, I'm not sure the technical reason why, but it's kind of robbing the nitrogen in that soil, that root ball, away from the tree. So this stuff is not helping. So it's great for mulch, it's fine, but it's not really great. It's actually, so what it's going to do, it's going to slow down the growth of the tree. So in a way, if you want the tree to grow slower, you could just leave it on there. But if you want the tree to kind of grow at its whatever pace it wants to grow at, then I just take this and I just get rid of it. Just, you can sprinkle it in your garden or on your lawn, wherever. So now essentially I've taken all that mulch off the top of the root ball. Here we go. Okay, so now we've taken our container. We've got about half an inch or so, 3/4 of an inch of this mix that I've made. Okay, so we're going to put our tree into the pot, and now it's simply a matter of backfilling around the pot with our mix that we've made here for the container. That's a big stick. So you can kind of gently shake the tree a little bit. Try not to lift it off the bottom, because then you're going to be letting more mix get underneath the root ball than you want. And I'll explain why having too much is not a good thing in a minute. So kind of gently do that as well. We're almost there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I've got it totally backfilled. I'm basically going to gently press this in, and after we're done that, we can mulch it and then we can water it. We don't want to compact this thing so hard that it's, you know, all the point of having all this good material that breathes well and allows moisture to trickle through because we want that good drainage. We don't want that compact. We just want this in snug so it's pretty solid. You may need to take your stake off and push it down a little further carefully and then retie just to make sure it's a bit more sturdy. So this is not the most perfect mulch by any means. Unfortunately, you know, where we used to live, we had great access to a variety of different mulches. So you're putting about, you know, 2 inches or so. If I had more room, I'd have 2 to 3 inches on here, but there's not a ton of room from where the root ball is to the top of the lip here. So you try to get at least 2 to 3 inches if possible. If this graft point is close to soil level, you want to make sure that's always uncovered. Now we've got our tree, it's in the pot. We've got our container mix that we all made together. You could, I've already got fertilizer in this potting mix, but you could alternatively just sprinkle a little bit on top underneath the mulch. Okay, so here's our potted up tree, and it's gonna look amazing on a little garden patio. Basically, once you've initially planted this into a new pot, if it's the next closest size up, so if you've taken this 1 gallon and you've tried to find a pot that fits closest to, you know, this dimension of that pot it was in, then there's not going to be a whole lot of movement with the tree, the wiggle stuff, you know, unless it's getting jostled around. If it's a bigger pot, which ideally you don't plant it up any bigger than, that much bigger than where it's at now, you don't want to go too big. If you're planting it in a pot that's too big, some trees are very vigorous and the roots are going to spread out fairly quickly. They're going to take up that space of all the new potting mix they have. They're going to take up the space, create a whole new solid root ball in that pot. But that's probably going to be in the minority of the Japanese maples. Some trees are going to do that, others are not, because they grow at different rates. And so what's going to happen is if you have your tree in there and you've got this tree sitting in, let's just say instead of putting it in this pot, we planted it in this bucket. Okay, so this bucket is a lot different size diameter than this pot that this tree came out of. So basically, you do something like that, you could end up having a container full of all this new soil that's waiting to be filled up by roots, and now you're watering this tree all the time, and you've got all this wet container mix that you've put in there, and there's nothing to soak it up, okay, because the tree has not grown into that space. So now you're running into a situation where you could get a root rot or something like that. So you're opening up the door to some problems. So basically, this is why you need to stick to the closest size container. Either go match it up with the next size. So if I take it out of this 1 gallon, you want to match it up as close as possible to this size if you're putting it into a pot, or the next closest size. It kind of depends on what your goals are. You know, if you're trying to get the growth to carry on as you want it, then, you know, bumping it up to the next size is fine. If you need to keep it small because it's on a balcony or a patio, and that's where you want to stay for its life, then that's fine too. By keeping it in, you know, the exact same size, for example, is going to reduce that growth, and then you just basically, it's up to you to have to do a little bit of root pruning from time to time. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Generally speaking, yes, you're taking it from this pot and trying to put it into something as close as possible to this or slightly bigger. As far as if this was to go in the landscape, we talked about that a little bit. It would be same kind of thing, you know, you'd end up digging a hole about 1.5 to 2 times size of the root ball, you know, essentially the same depth into the ground. Is you take whatever native soil you had there and amend it, you know, with this kind of mix, something like that. When you're all done, you know, just gently but kind of firmly plant your tree in there. And if it's a bigger tree, you know, you can easily use the sole of your boots, no problem. Just do a couple, get it in there, stake it as necessary, get your mulch on there, water it good that first time. Again, the planting is a lot like a lot of other plants, a lot of other trees. One of the biggest things is going to be the drainage. So we use that mix to kind of help create a good drainage. And so we want drainage because wet feet on the Japanese maples is not a surefire way to kill them, but it's a good start. Guys, if you have any questions, definitely you can ask in the comments section here or contact us directly through the website. You can find these amazing trees and many, many more, simplyjapanesemaples.ca. And just a reminder of how amazing these trees look. When you want to put them in a container, these look awesome. So, guys, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.